As you guys have noticed, I don't have a lot of subscribers on YouTube because I run a natural bodybuilding channel. So it seems that there's not really a lot of demand on YouTube for the natural bodybuilding thing. So it only makes sense that I would go out in nature to find new subscribers. Yeah, maybe there's somebody out here that might want to subscribe, you know. Hey, you guys got iPads or phones or laptops or something? Hey, trees have laptops, right? Trees, Sasquatches, animals of any kind that are interested in the internet. Anyone?
Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Bodybuilding Mountain. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I got big as a natural bodybuilder. Genetics aside, okay? Because we always know that genetics play a role with any sport that you're doing. Because if you have good genetics, you're going to adapt much more so than someone who has horrible genetics. That's just common sense, right? That's just basically something that we already know. But genetics aside, these are the main things that I did in order to become bigger as a natural bodybuilder at the prime of my career in natural bodybuilding, where I won the nationals. I got second in the Natural Universe 2 years in a row. I got second in the Natural Olympia. I got third in the heavyweight pro division in the WNBF Natural Universe. So I did quite a bit in natural bodybuilding. And these are the main principles that I stuck to for the most part throughout my career. Now, the first one is consistency. Now, a lot of people underestimate this simple fact. If you're consistent with something over the long run, your bodybuilding journey is going to pay you bigger dividends than if you're training and then you're not training, or say you train religiously 4 or 5 days a week, but then of course you go to the bar and get drunk on the weekends, and then you come back Monday and then, okay, now I'm going to take my bodybuilding journey seriously. I'm going to try to put on muscle, and then back to the bar on the weekend and getting drunk. You know, so I was consistent not only with my training, but I was consistent with eating in a certain way that was not going to be a detriment to my recovery, right? One could say that you could maybe eat a little bit more fat or a little bit more carbs than usual and still recover from your workouts. But once you start putting toxins in your body, like alcohol, that can be a supreme detriment. And I avoided that stuff like the plague. I think there's like 1 or 2 times a year I'd have a drink or two with my friends, but for the most part, I stayed away from any of that stuff. And I stayed away from any sort of drug use or alcohol or any of that kind of stuff. And I stuck to a healthy lifestyle, at least what I thought was healthy for my eating, so that way I could recover from my workouts and maintain the pump. Because if my diet was going sideways, or if my training was going sideways, say I was missing several days in a week, I'd notice that my pump would not be as good, or my strength would not be as good. So I noticed that consistency was key. I had to maintain my 5 to 6 days a week of training. I had to maintain a certain amount of volume, and I had to maintain proper eating and sleep as well, because consistent sleep is just as important as consistent training. So all of these factors had to remain consistent in order for me to get the most out of my training, and that's really what I feel made a really huge difference in comparison to, say, some other people that did not compete at a high level. Now, number 2 is basic nutrition. I'm not talking about whether you're in this specialty type of diet or that specialty type of diet, but what I did consistently was maintain about 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein and have carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates with each meal throughout the day, along with a little bit of green vegetables. And eating these meals about 4 to 5 times a day throughout the day consistently helped me maintain muscle mass as well as put on muscle and maintain glycogen balance. So you notice if guys are like flattened out, if they're not eating enough starch or fats, you know, because some people rely on fats for their energy. And there's arguments for or against using fat or carbs for energy and stuff, but without getting into that, for the most part, I relied on protein and starch for my main foundation of my nutritional diet. And I would add in some greens, of course, and some essential fats here and there through flaxseed oil or salmon oil or some sort of naturally occurring fats that were happening in fish and so forth. But for the most part, I had a starch and protein foundation of my diet that I maintained throughout the day. So about 5 meals a day, sometimes 6 meals. And that would be the mainstay of my nutritional program. And that allowed me to maintain muscle mass along with recover from my workouts and have plenty of energy for my training. Now, of course, when I was dieting down for a show, I would start to change up the macros and play around with how much energy food I was taking in. But for the most part, as I was training to put on muscle, this was the foundation of what I did. Now, number 3 is I was not afraid to change up the rep ranges. A lot of times you'll see people go in the gym and they will get obsessed with one rep range or another. They'll either stick with the 5 rep training program because they heard from somebody that that's the only way to progressive overload your training, or you have to do the pyramid training because that's the only way to get stronger. And that's absolute bullshit. I'll tell you right now, it's absolute bullshit. I found that using heavy days, like 5 to 7 to 8 reps, and then other days where I stayed with 15 reps or 12 reps or 20 reps, and then other days where I just did sets of 10, worked better than if I went heavy consistently all the time. I found going heavy all the time actually worked against my bodybuilding gains, and if anything, it gave me more injuries or more issues with the body. So I found that varying up the rep ranges not only allowed you to give certain areas of the body a rest, but it also allowed you to hit certain muscle fibers more than other muscle fibers, and therefore you got a synergistic effect in the body and put on a lot more muscle mass. So changing up the rep ranges was key. It wasn't just about sticking to one rep range like 8 to 12 reps or 5 reps or getting obsessed with how much my 1 rep max was one day. Like I threw 1 rep maxes right out the door. And once I started to do this, I started to notice a much better physique developing before my eyes because I was hitting a larger scope of muscle fibers and I was ensuring that I was getting plenty of hypertrophy along with challenging the system from time to time with some strength training. So this is what I did. I applied progressive overload with multiple rep ranges, not just with the low rep ranges, and that's a big mistake a lot of people make when they're trying to train to put on muscle. Now, number 4 is I wasn't afraid to play around with exercise frequency. As a lot of you guys know who have been here for a while, I advocate a moderate to higher frequency type training for a lot of people. It doesn't mean this is the same for everybody, but only through you experimenting with how frequently you train your muscles in a week will you start to see what gives you the best dividends or the best bang for your buck. So for the longest time, I did 3-day splits and 4-day splits, and for the most part, I got great results with a 3-day split. But most of the time, I was sticking to the 3-day split because people told me that 48 to 72 hours was a must for muscles to recover, and if you train any more than that, you're overtraining and it's going to work against you instead of for you. Well, when I stumbled across a different type of training program which split the body into 2 different days called the 2-day split, which I also have on my website, I started to notice that something else started to happen in my body where I started to refine my exercise groove, where I started to get stronger without necessarily having to lift heavier weights. I was lifting moderate weights sometimes, like 12 to 15 reps, but all of a sudden I was going up in strength because my coordination was increasing so much from the frequency of training. And therefore I was able to handle much higher poundages more often. Now, of course, my volume had to come down, but I was putting on strength and strength endurance, and I was putting on muscle just from one thing, and that was changing my exercise frequency. So no matter what frequency you're doing right now, don't be afraid to experiment a bit to see what gives you the best bang for your buck, because maybe that frequency you're not doing might give you the best results. I'm not an advocate of one way or the other. I'm an advocate of what works. And this experiment of exercise frequency revealed massive results for me at certain points in my training. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is the most controversial and the most argued subject in YouTube fitness today. And that is, I experimented with range of motion to find out where was the tension actively working on my body with any sort of given range of motion. And what I noticed is by experimenting with my range of motion, I found the best happy medium between lifting the heaviest weight and putting the most amount of stress on the muscle belly instead of extra stress on the tendons and ligaments in the body. So for squats, for instance, people make fun of me for my squat because it's like a 90-degree squat and I squat low bar. But because of the way I'm built, this is the perfect scenario for me putting the massive amount of stress on my hamstrings along with the outer sweep of my thigh. And I had judges come up to me at the musclemedia 1999 specifically to ask me to stop training my legs because my legs got so big on stage, they were out of proportion. So what I'm gonna say to you is that when you find the perfect range of motion to really focus that tension on the muscle bellies with giving the least amount of destructive stress to your joints, you're gonna notice a lot of gains in muscle mass and a lot of reduction in joint pain, which is what we're all after. Because in the end, what ends people's careers in bodybuilding or any sport is usually a joint issue. Now, the thing that's always said by people on the internet is that, oh, well, you gotta train the joints because, you know, if you don't train the joints, you're gonna get weak. Well, I'm gonna say to you, you're already training the joints. The joints are already taking an exponential amount of stress. You don't need to accentuate that stress or overindulge in it in order to train the joints. So the joints are getting trained, but you need to ask yourself, are you doing nothing more than just destroying your joints during a workout? Or are you actively working the muscles and the muscle bellies to get the most amount of muscle mass and the least amount of stress on the joints in the process? Because like I said, the joints are already taking stress. So yeah, by finding the perfect ranges of motion for different exercises, I found not only ways to avoid elbow stress or shoulder stress, but I also found ways to grow in muscle mass. Now, these ranges of motion will be different for each person. You're going to move in a much different way than I will in order to achieve the best possible amount of stress on your muscle bellies. It is true that some people need to do maybe ass to the grass squats in order to get the most quadricep and hamstring development, while other people maybe need to do 90-degree squats for the same goal or the same results. So it's really up to you to conduct that experiment and find out what works. What every professional athlete or every elite athlete finds out specifically what their body needs in order to accomplish the goal. And you need to conduct your own experiments in order to find out what this is. Mountain. So yeah, those are the main ways that I got big as a natural bodybuilder. I hope this helps you out in your training. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the Patreon supporters, where I'm doing a podcast every week. If you guys want to tune into that, the link is in the description, and take care for now. Natural land.